If you're a parent, have you ever known something that the kid was going to have to sit through, and you promised them if you be good that they get a prize or something at the end? Okay, well, I promise you, we're going to go long today. But here's the thing: if you behave and go through and stick, stay awake during my sermon, then we will get the youth band up one more time today, and you can listen to them and worship with them. So, okay, yes. Actually, if you fall asleep, they're still going to come up, but that's beside the point. Now, when I was a kid, I was in the Cub Scouts for a few years, and it was something my friends did, and so I joined in, and I made it all the way from Cub to Webelow, whatever the heck that is. And one of the things associated with Cub Scouts, and some of you Boy Scouts are probably reciting what a Webelow is right now. Don't tell me afterwards. I don't want to know, okay? One of the things associated with Cub Scouts was this magazine called Boys Life magazine. And since I had shown interest, my mom got me a subscription to this magazine. And the magazine had stories and how-tos and comics and things like that. But I think my favorite part of the magazine was found in the back of the magazine. And in the back was an ad page. It looked a little like this. And it had all sorts of fun little gadgets and different things that you could buy for a variety of prices. And I would spend time going through each ad, looking at those ads and trying and dreaming of what I might buy. Well, in the months that I received those magazines and the many ads that I reviewed, there were three things in particular that caught my attention month after month. The first thing was this. It was the survival knife. For just under $5, I could have this awesome knife. And not only was it really cool and scary looking, but the handle actually held a bunch of other cool stuff too. It had fishing hooks and line, it had matches, it had a saw cable, all kinds of stuff that you would need to survive. And I wanted this knife for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons that I wanted this knife was because of this guy, Rambo. Now, I'm pretty sure that I didn't see Rambo at the time that I was wanting this knife. I'm pretty sure my mom never would have let me watch that movie, but I knew good and well who Rambo was. Rambo was an all-American hero. He was a man's man, a manly man, and he had the coolest survival knife ever. And I knew that if I got that survival knife out of Boys Life magazine, that I could be just like Rambo. That would be a little more like Rambo. But I also wanted it because of its practicality. I had envisioned in my mind how my 8-year-old self might get stranded somewhere in a wilderness where I might have to depend on my own cunning skills and this amazing, scary-looking knife to find life until I was rescued from whatever situation I found myself in. I wanted to be prepared. But there were a few reasons that I never actually got that knife. First of all, my mom would never have let me have a really cool and scary-looking knife. She thought I would cut my finger off or something like that. But also, this knife was just not for me. It just wasn't for me. Even though it might make me look a little more like Rambo, no one was ever going to mistake me for Rambo. It didn't really fit who I was. And the chances of a 9-year-old me being stranded in some kind of a situation where this knife would be necessary were about as equal as 9-year-old me being cast for a Rambo sequel as the lead character. And so I never got the knife. Another thing I was interested in was this product sold by a guy named Charles Atlas. Here's the advertisement, what it looked like. It showed a story about this skinny weakling, and you can see, hey, Skinny, your ribs are showing. He's on the beach with a girl, and some bully is picking on him. And then later on, he gets this stuff from Charles Atlas, and he turns into this man, this muscle-bound guy, and he goes back to the beach, and he shows that bully what for. And she goes, and the girl, you can't see it there, she goes, oh, Joe, you are a real He-Man after all. And then it says, what a man! In the back, the other girls that are also attractive say, and he used to be so skinny. And it looked like that, and it was, if you used Mr. Atlas product, it was a good deal, apparently. And now, as much as the Rambo knife just wasn't for me, I have to say that this product really seemed to fit me to a T. Because here is actually a picture of what I looked like around the time that I was getting Boys Life magazine. Just in case you're wondering, I'm the guy on the right, okay? Oh, those shorts. Yes, my mom hated me, apparently. Just soak that beauty in for just a moment. Yes. Isn't it beautiful? It gets better the longer you look at it, doesn't it? It really does. And so you can see that I definitely could benefit from whatever it was that Charles Atlas was selling. But here was the problem. Mr. Atlas was promising life-changing results almost overnight. There were several ads for Charles Atlas's product, and I don't even know what it was. You'd send it in, you get a free book, you had a pill or something like that. I don't remember what it was. I never really knew. But he was promising life-changing overnight results. And I knew that there were a lot of boys in Cub Scouts, and I knew there were a lot of boys that subscribed to Boys Life, but I never remembered in my school a skinny weakling coming in one week looking like this, and then the next week coming in as an Adonis. It just didn't happen. And I couldn't help but think that if this product really did what it says it did, that I would see evidence of my fellow Cub Scouts that it really worked. And so I never got Mr. Atlas product until later on, obviously, because now I'm the Adonis, right? But then it was this. I didn't really get his product, by the way. Then it was this. It was sea monkeys. This I really wanted. I mean, look at the promise that you see in this ad. You may not be able to read it all, but the promise is it says, it's a bowl full of happiness. Who doesn't want a bowl full of happiness? It says instant pets. I loved pets. Pets are awesome. This is the best part. So eager to please, they can even be trained. Now, this one was doable, okay? It wasn't going to hurt me. It wasn't going to cut my finger off. It wasn't something that I kind of questioned about the results. And so I asked my mom if I could mail in some money to get my own bowl of happiness. But unfortunately, she said no. But I didn't give up the dream. I didn't give up. Because one day I was with my mother and I went to the mall, which is a rare occasion in my life because the mall was 72 miles away. And she let me go into the toy store and she let me look around. And that's when I saw it. A sea monkey kit right there in my very presence on the shelf of the toy store. And it must have been around Christmas or my birthday or something because I actually had enough money to buy this sea monkey kit. And so I asked my mom two important questions. First of all, I asked her, are these the same as in the magazine? Because I wanted purebred sea monkeys. I didn't want any cheap knockoff, Heinz 57 sea monkeys. Of course, the second question was, can I buy it? Can I get them? And she told me that I could. It may not be exactly like the Boys Life one, but yes, they were the same kind of sea monkeys, and yes, I could get them. And so when we got home, I followed the instructions exactly, and I waited the short time until I could start teaching my bowl of happiness, my new pets, the tricks that I could teach them. But in a few days, this is actually what my sea monkey habitat looked like. Now, that's not actually mine, but that's pretty much exactly what it looked like. Inside this soupy bowl where there's little bitty specks of something apparently swimming around, so small that I couldn't really tell what was sea monkey and what was just a floaty in the bowl. And it just it was not at all what I expected. These weren't instant pets, they were just floaties. There was no way to train them to do tricks, and it was certainly not a bowl of happiness. Well, this whole sermon series has been about that feeling that there's got to be something more to church and something more to following Jesus than what has been accepted as normal. And I would suggest to you that one of the reasons people aren't generally interested in church if they don't know Jesus these days is that we've kind of advertised the church like the back page of Boys Life magazine. We made people that think that it's about a building or it's about a calendar of activities that come to this place and adhere to this schedule, and that's what church is about. Or we've made big promises and say, I accepted Jesus, and if you accept Jesus, He will change your life. Your life will be completely transformed. And we've hyped up our Sunday mornings and church programs. Oh, you got to hear this new preacher or this worship band, or you got to come see this thing that we're doing. And we've hyped all those things up. Or come to this event. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be great. But just like me and that Rambo knife, people look at church as a building, as a calendar of events, and they say, it's not really for me. I've actually heard people say, and I'm so thankful for their honesty. When I asked the question about why don't you go to church, if you went to church at one point, I asked this on Facebook, if you went to church at one point and don't go anymore, why? And several people just said, we're just too busy, and Sunday mornings are our time just to catch up and decompress. And so they looked at the church as we sold it, and we said, no, it's just not for me. It doesn't really fit what I'm doing in my life. Or maybe like me and Charles Atlas, people look at our life-changing promises and they say, if this really worked, maybe I'd see more evidence in this world. There are a lot of churches in this world, but I don't see a lot of evidence that the world has really changed. So maybe they're skeptical of those big, huge, grandiose promises that we make. And maybe like me and the Sea Monkeys, when people do actually experience our church programs, maybe they come to us and they join us on a Sunday morning or an event, whatever else, and maybe let's be honest, maybe they leave disappointed and empty. That we promised them it would do one thing, or at least implied that just attending would fill that void in their heart, and they realize that didn't happen, and so they leave disappointed. And it's all really because our story hasn't reflected God's story. Our results, what we are as a church in general, have not really reflected God's story. Remember, we kicked this series off back on Easter Sunday. We talked about 3 things that churches have been known to focus on. Every church I've been a part of my entire life has really focused on these 3 things in part. The first one is church activity, right? Going to church, going to Bible study, going to church events, doing that sort of thing, which of course we still do. But that's kind of been the focus. If we could just get people to our activities, then we're good to go. And the second thing is behavior management, right? That if you just behave better, our goal is to bring you to church and then teach you how to be a better person, to how to act more like Jesus, we would call it, we would say. But really it's about not sinning and doing the things that we shouldn't do. And then of course the last thing we do is we talk a lot about waiting for heaven. That when we're baptized, that's almost like a ticket to heaven sometimes. Now you're saved, and guess what? If you die in a car crash tomorrow, you're going to be in glory with God forever and ever, amen. And that's really good news. Except for what do I do for the next 60 years if I'm a youngster and in life, what do I just wait? And again, as I said before when we started this, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that those things are bad or wrong. I think we should be together more. And even though I think maybe our church definition of church activity should be adapted, because you know what? I got to be honest with you. We're going to have church at the bowling alley today. We're not going to be singing songs. We're not going to be taking communion, but we're going to have God's people together, having fun and celebrating and just having a good time. That's church. So we need to have church activity. And certainly God expects us to manage our behavior, to be transformed, to be more like Him. And certainly we have that great promise of eternity with God. I don't want to minimize that at all. But as I said on Easter Sunday, that when the women went to Jesus' tomb for that first Easter morning, and the angel declared, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's risen," as recorded in Luke 24, that the next words out of their mouths would not have been, "Now go to church, be good, and wait for heaven." That's not what the angels would have said. It's not what Jesus said. You see, what it all really comes down to is purpose. We've used the word mission a lot in this day, and that's what it is, but really it's about purpose. And the best way to know our purpose is to know who and what we are. Here's a little crowd participation. I'm going to show you an object on the screen, and this is not hard, so don't worry, no tough quizzes here today. I want to put an item on the screen, and I want you to just shout out what it is, okay? First one, go. Can opener. Now here's the tough part of the quiz. What is the purpose of a can opener? Very good, class. All right, let's show the next one. The next one is a chainsaw. Now, don't get tripped up. The purpose of a chainsaw is not to saw chains. Okay, I know I said the can opener, but what is the purpose of a chainsaw? To cut down trees, to cut wood. Right, okay, what's the next one? Remote control, right? And what's the purpose of a remote control? Change the channel, turn up the TV, turn down the TV. It's also the purpose of a kid if you lost your remote control, I found. Okay, the last one. Cell phone. Now this one's a little tougher. What's the purpose of a cell phone? You can call people, you can text people, you can play games, you can get on the internet. There's a lot of purposes, right? There's a lot of purposes with those items. And so you really could use these things for a variety of purposes, but the reality is if you try to use your chainsaw as a can opener, it might work, but it's probably not going to be very efficient. And if you try to use your can opener as a remote control, maybe if you could just throw it at the TV and hit it right on the right spot, it might change the channel. But they have a specific purpose, right? That when they are serving their purpose, that's when they're the most useful. That's when they are fulfilling their design. They're designed for some very specific things. And knowing what they are helps identify what their purpose is. You see, the problem is the way that we've presented church to the world has really resulted in a case of mistaken identity and mistaken purpose. That we've kind of said, this is what church is. And by the way, again, it's not been overt. It's not even necessarily been audible. It's just been by our actions and by the way we treat others and way we do things. And it kind of gives this impression that this is what church is, which really has given a case of mistaken identity and a mistaken purpose. It's kind of confused people, perhaps, about the purpose of the church. For example, when we attract people to church activities, come and listen to this, come and do that, we really kind of turn people into consumers. We're appealing to their consumer nature. And so what happens if you say, come hear the great new preacher, and the preacher's there, and guess what? If he doesn't preach a good sermon the next week, well, why are they there? Or let's say the preacher moves on. Why are they there? Or it's this old adage that you say, what you win them with is what you win them to. We try to attract people with certain events and whatever the case may be, or people or programs. And what happens so many times is that when people become dissatisfied with whatever they came to church for in the first place, they try to go find it somewhere else. Because they weren't attracted there because of relationship and because of Jesus. It was because of the music or the preacher or the VBS or fill in the blank. And so what we've done there is we've kind of mistaken the identity and mistaken the purpose. When we focus on changing people's behavior, we turn them into projects. And they think that the purpose of the church then is to be this place where you go to become a better person. Or when we focus on waiting for heaven, we turn life into just one giant waiting room. And we make church kind of the reminder spot of, okay, now we're going to meet once a week to make sure we're ready for heaven. And that's not at all what God says. In fact, the Bible says there's much more. And that the church and God's people, we're not to be consumers. We're not to be projects. We're not to be people just biding their time until heaven. Here's some things the Apostle Paul said that we, the church, God's people are. We are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field and God's building. Galatians 4:7, since you are no longer a slave but God's child, and since you are His child, God has made you an heir. Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's handiwork. Again, that's talking about the church. It's not talking about you are God's handiwork, or maybe in the older versions, you are God's masterpiece. It's we, the church, is God's masterpiece, His handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works for which God prepared in advance for us to do. And then the Apostle Peter said in 1 Peter 2:9, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful life. You see, the reality is that God does call us together as a church. Hebrews says, don't give up meeting, as some have done, but meet more often. And again, we need to perhaps redefine what that means about church activity. He certainly does expect that. And He does call us to have lives that are transformed and are continually being transformed. And He does promise us one day that the new heaven and new earth will be ushered in by His Son, Jesus. But these pictures, these word pictures of what the church is to be, are really, they show we have much greater purpose. That this life has meaning and that we're also invited to be not only God's children, which is awesome in itself, but also His co-workers created to accomplish something for His glory that we were uniquely created to accomplish. Something in His kingdom, in His mission, in His purposes that we, both as a church collectively and as individuals, were created specifically to accomplish for His glory. That's pretty cool right there. You see, we might find a lot of good in church activities. We might find a lot of good in living holy lives. We might find hope in the eternity that is to come. But the reality and the truth is that we will only find full life, as Jesus promised, in fulfilling our purpose in God's mission of redemption and reconciliation. Anything else is a can opener trying to cut down a tree or trying to change a TV You might accomplish some other things, but it's not going to happen as efficiently unless you're fulfilling and doing exactly what God designed you to do. Now, Jesus summarized that purpose in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, part of the Sermon on the Mount, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, this passage, as I said, is found in what is known as the Sermon on the Mount, in which Jesus teaches about the kingdom of God. So he's talking, in this instance, he's talking about our identity, who we are, which then informs our purpose, what we were designed to accomplish. Now, Jesus uses two very common things to explain the role of church in the world. He talks about salt and he talks about light. Now, you've probably heard me say before, but we got to be very careful not to oversimplify what Jesus is saying here. It's very easy to turn this verse, and like so many other Bible verses, into a nice little neat thing to put, on tapestry and hang in our living rooms. It's very easy to make it a nice little sweet saying. And you might look at this, and I've even heard it preached before, to say, oh yeah, we need to make this world a little brighter. We need to make this world a little brighter. We need to make it a little more tasty for those around us. And I think that just is an assault on God's word, to be honest with you. Assault, get it? No pun intended, or maybe it was, I don't know. But it's not the fullness of what Jesus intended. It's much, much more than just that. There's some clear characteristics that the church should exhibit when we look at this passage, when we understand in the context that it was spoken. So let's take a look at these two things, salt and light, and see what it means about us as the church. First thing, we are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus said. Riley, hand me that, would you? The first thing we probably think about whenever you think of salt is this. You got this. Everybody's got something like this in their house, probably. You think of table salt. When you think about that, when I lived in Ohio for many years, close to 7 years, when I think of salt, I also think of the roads and melting the ice and snow off the roads and the massive amounts of that. I remember the big piles of salt that they would build up in the summer so they could deplete it in the wintertime, with all the snow that we got. In fact, more than 51% of the salt produced is to de-ice roads, believe it or not, and only 8% is used for table salt. Little trivia for you there. But these are really, if you think about it, table salt and salt for the roads are the two main uses for salt in our world today, in our culture today. But people in Jesus' time would have had a very different perspective on salt. First of all, salt was very highly prized. It was very highly prized. This container of salt, I bought it this morning, or my wife bought it this morning, or she picked it out and I paid for it, and it was 62 cents at Walmart for this container of salt. And this will last us about 32 years. And although if that little, Brian, I think it's comedian Brian Regan says, if you get that little thing that's bent, you got to take it and get it repaired, because you're going to have it for 32 years. But it's 62 cents, and I'm guessing that none of you have this locked up in a safe in your home. It's like you don't want anybody to get to your salt, so you got to lock it up or hide it or whatever the case may be. But that's how much it was valued in Jesus' time. The city locations, including the city of Rome, were often determined by the location of salt works. And countries would actually go to war over salt. The word salary, you've heard that word, right? It comes from the Latin word salarius, which was paid to Roman soldiers for their service, either in units of salt or so that they could actually purchase salt specifically. That's where that word salary comes from. When Jesus mentions the word salt, his listeners wouldn't have thought simply of a salt shaker, but a very valuable commodity. And the reason it was so valuable is because of what it could do. Salt was so valuable because primarily it was used as a preservative. That was the first and foremost reason salt was so valuable. Obviously, there were no Whirlpool side-by-side fridge store refrigerators in the time. There were no deep freezers back then, and so it was very important to preserve food in a different way. And salt was used to preserve food, and meat in particular, so it would not decay. And the preservation of food for that society was not just a convenience issue, it was a matter of life and death. In fact, if we look through history, entire countries collapsed and went away because of famine, because of a lack of food. And salt allowed countries and individuals store food for extended periods of time. Now, in a similar way, salt was used to preserve health. Salt was used to treat wounds, to keep them from being infected. You know, there was no Neosporin or Band-Aids back in that day. And so if you had a cut on your hand, guess what you'd do, kiddos? You'd sprinkle salt in it. Exactly. That would hurt. And of course, to be honest, salt was also used for taste purposes. It was used for seasoning food as well in Jesus' time. But that was not, by no means, the primary use of salt. But here's the thing about how they would have understood it, is that regardless of the use, whether it be for preservation, for cleaning a wound, for making food taste better, even for melting ice off the road, the universal characteristic of salt remains the same. Salt is an agent of change. It's an agent of change. The bottom line is that anything salt touches, it changes. When salt touches food, it changes the way it tastes. And it also can stop it from decaying if it's on certain foods. When it touches a wound, it changes the way it heals. When it touches ice, it melts it. And so we find our first characteristic of the church in this world today. And the characteristic is the church, too, if we are the salt of the earth, we are to change everything we come in contact with. The church is to change everything it comes in contact with. We should be constantly looking to find ways to change the world around us and to be more like God intended it to be, to do His will, to make His will happen on earth as it is in heaven, and also, by the way, to preserve God's will on this earth, to its God, and preserve everything to its God-intended state. And we are to be salt because it is our purpose to be sprinkled into the world and as co-workers with God to help redeem and restore the lives of the people that we come in contact with on a regular basis. And the great thing is that a single grain of salt changes what it touches. A single grain changes, we can change a plate of food just by sprinkling a few grains of salt over the entire plate. Here's the good news. Church, we are already sprinkled. We don't live in a commune somewhere and all work on some hippie ranch. We're all spread out in our own homes, in our own jobs, in our own lives, doing different things. We're already sprinkled out, but the problem is that the church, not just us, but as a whole, have a tendency to just be salty when we get together. That we're sprinkled, but we reserve the saltiness for the times that we come together on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or at any other given time for a Bible study or church activity. When I first got married, you probably heard this story before, but one time Carrie made me biscuits and gravy for breakfast on a Sunday morning before church, and this is right after we got married. And by the way, my wife is an extraordinary cook. She does a good job. I've never gone hungry in my house. And she does a really good job of cooking, but she grew into that. She'll be the first to admit this to you. And this particular Sunday morning, she made me biscuits and gravy. It was really good for the most part, and it's one of my favorite things to have for breakfast. And so she made the biscuits and gravy, and I dipped it out, and I had it, we're sitting at the table together like nice newly married couples do. And I took a bite, and it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever had in my life. Because I think she probably used about 3/4 of one of these in a small pot of gravy. But of course, I kept my mouth shut. Well, actually I didn't. I kept my mouth open and I shoveled it in until finally, by the grace of God, she sat down and had a bite herself and said, "Oh my gosh, stop eating that now." And the problem was there was too much of this in one place. It just needed a little bit sprinkled, but it was too much concentrated to that. And that's what will happen if we limit our saltiness to our own little community of believers. We got to be salty wherever we go. But Jesus said something else. He said, "You are the light of the world." This one's a little more simple. Certainly the audience Jesus was speaking to would have had a little different perspective. There was no electricity, there were no street lights, there were no super bright floodlights, and so darkness would have been a little more intense for them. In fact, it really is. It's even difficult for us to even find complete darkness in today's society. I dare you to go find a place to find complete darkness. It's not going to be in your house, probably. I've seen it probably a couple times when I've visited caves before, and they turn off the lights in the cave I was touring. You can't really find it because there's always, in the countryside, a light in the distance. There's always some place where there's a little bit of light coming through. But when Jesus talked about the lamp and lampstand, his listeners would have thought about how their houses were set up. And typically the houses were one-room structures that would have had a single oil lamp that would have illuminated the entire room. And because of a lack of other ambient lighting, no street lights, no anything like that, the lamp, when the lamp was not burning at night, it probably would have been nearly pitch dark in the house. My first year of youth ministry, which happened to be actually the same time I was married to Carrie, and I probably had biscuits and gravy this weekend, who knows. But we did this little game with the youth group called Capture the Flag. Played that game before, probably heard of that game. Here's the difference. We played it in the dark. Here's what we did. We had a church building. It was in the country. There was only 7 houses in the entire community, and there were no street lights. And so we covered the windows. We turned off all the lights at night, and we put one flag on one end of the church. We put one flag on the communion table on the other end of the church, and we just turned off all the lights, and it was close to pitch dark as you could find in that moment. And then we went and did the whole capture the flag thing. You can file that under the stupidest things I've ever done as a youth minister. Because a couple of things were happening. When it's pitch dark and you have a whole bunch of teenagers in a building, they see opportunity. Opportunity for mischief. Now, I hope and pray, I don't know that anything really bad ever happened when we were playing that game, but I do remember one time, I believe, Carrie and I were trying to figure out who it was, and we narrowed it down to, there could have been 3 members of our youth group could have been the one who did this. That tells you about our youth group. But I think it was the preacher's kid, because that's just how it goes. And I remember we stopped the game, we turned on the lights, we're like, where is this kid? Where is he at? And no, I don't know, we can't find him. And so we walked into the sanctuary. Finally, somebody said, hey, I think I found him, come in here. And they let us into the sanctuary, and we were standing there, where is he? We can't see him anywhere. And they said, look down. And we looked down, there was a floor grate about 5 feet long and about this wide, and he had taken the grate off, gotten down into the floor, and pulled the grate down on top of him, back on top of him. And he was hiding in the floor. That's just an example of the mischief that can take place. But the other problem is that people got hurt. They were running and bumping into walls and pews and all kinds of stuff, and there were bruises and bumps and scrapes and all that kind of stuff. And if we would have done with this a little bit of light, maybe we would have had flashlights. That would have made it a lot better. In a similar way, that the church is to light the way to Christ for the world. You see, the world we're in, it's a lot like that church. The darkness leads to mischief, or as the Bible calls it, sin. John 3:19. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Ephesians 5:8. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. And the truth is that darkness, it also leads to stumbling as we make our way down our path. You know, I think that's part of the reason people are so hit and miss about different things in their life, that they jump from job to job, or from spouse to spouse, or from hobby to hobby, or whatever the case may be. We just keep trying to feel our way through life without the light of Christ. And we stumble through life. We don't ever get to where we're going because we can't see the true way. This world needs our light, and this is how it works in verse 16 of Matthew 5. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. In other words, that we are to shine our light by living a life of good deeds. People will see those deeds not look at us and go, wow, what a great person, or what a great church. But they'll say, what a great God. They'll give glory to our Father in heaven. And so this is important. This is so important that Jesus offers a bit of a warning in conjunction with this instruction to be salt and to be light. And the first one is don't lose your saltiness. Matthew 5, verse 13. You're the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. I used to have a little different understanding of that verse when I was a kid, but then I went to science class, and I learned something. Salt is sodium chloride, NaCl, on the element table for you nerds out there. And what that says is it's an element that cannot be changed by losing, it's not going to lose its saltiness. You just can't make it lose its salt. I could let this sit on my table for the rest of my life. On the day before I die, I could sprinkle it on my food and it'll have the same purpose as it does today. So what does Jesus mean? Is Jesus just wrong? No. But what does he mean? See, the people listening to Jesus would have known exactly what he meant, because remember I talked about how salt was so valuable? And so what would happen is that dishonorable or dishonest merchants would sometimes mix in white sand in with the salt to make more money. Salt was expensive, sand was free. Mix a little in there, so your food, and let's be honest, the food's going to be a little gritty anyway in Jesus' time. You're baking it in brick ovens in the open air of your home, and so, what's a little white sand in there? And when the salt was mixed with these impurities, such as this sand, it would be worthless for its purpose. If somebody gave you, if I told you, okay, I'm going to sell you a thing of salt, but half of it's going to be white sand, you're going to throw it away. You're not going to put it in your chili. It's not good. It's not good for what you're doing. And the reason we are not change agents for God, the reason we lose our saltiness is that because not because we're not capable, because we are salt. It's not because we aren't salty. It's because we've surrounded ourselves with things that make us less effective in our purpose. We've added little bits of white sand to our life. We've mixed in the impurity of churchianity with our Christianity. We've tried to win people to church instead of win people to Christ first and foremost. We've allowed fear and judgment or selfishness to be a barrier between us and from that for which we've been called to change. That I'm not going to go talk to that person because I'm scared, or I'm not going to talk to that person because whenever I say it out loud, but I'm better than them. And I don't want to be around those people. Selfish is that I'm called to go change that person, but I'd much rather spend time working on me and talking about me and focusing on me. And those are things that are little bits of white salt in our midst. And we've settled for a substitute of discipleship that keeps us at arm's length from our mission field. I've seen that throughout my life, is that really what we've done is we've said, okay, we are to reach the lost, but don't hang out with the lost. Don't go out there with them. Spend some time here at a fellowship dinner, but don't go out. It keeps us from arm's length from our mission field. And as Jesus said, a church that is not changing the community in which it exists is pretty much worthless. Let me say that again. I want to say it clearly. Jesus said that when a church is not changing the community in which it exists, it is worthless. And that sounds harsh, but it's not me saying it. Jesus says if you're not changing, if you're not this agent of change, you'll be trampled. You lose your salt. In fact, the literal translation for loses its saltiness is to become foolish or to cause to become nonsense. And a church that isn't changing the world through its people isn't a church at all. It just doesn't make sense according to what Jesus said. Which brings us to the second warning. Don't hide your light. Verse 14, you're the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. And I hate to say this because I've been a part of the problem a lot of my life as a minister. But one of the biggest bowls that has covered the light that God has called us to shine is that we have not challenged and equipped the people of God, you, to do the very things which God has prepared you in advance to do for His glory. That we've let the professionals handle it. We've taken the focus off of you and the responsibilities and the roles off of you. And I'll be honest with you, we've lowered the standards of what it means to be a part of a church. We've lowered the expectations of being a church member. And we've really essentially let church members off the hook. We've let you off the hook. Here's the thing, is that sounds all negative. Like that kind of sounds like me saying you should be doing more, which is probably true. And I mean that not just for this congregation, but as a whole. But the other flip side of that is that we've robbed you of something really great. We've robbed you of experiencing the fullness for which you were designed. If you were a can opener, we've said, you know what, you guys, tell you what, you just sit in the drawer, hang out in the drawer. Once in a while, we'll put you in the dishwasher, but for now, just sit in the drawer, and we'll take care of opening the cans. Now, we're going to get a group together. Let's talk about opening cans, but we're going to do the can opening for you. And that robs you from that fulfillment of your purpose, robs you from that experience, and robs you from the more that we all long for in that full life that Jesus has offered us. And so we as a church are trying to make it right in the way we do things. Here's what we're doing to be the church that God calls us to be. First of all, we are sprinkling ourselves all over. Two things, koinonia groups, and I just briefly want to mention those two groups and what they do. Remember, we've got two groups that are designed two different ways. The Connecting Neighborhood group is salt to a specific area. Not too salty by any stretch of the imagination, but they're all focused on the same mission and working together. Then you've got the network who is sprinkled out along a lot of different places. And they're sprinkled out to do the mission wherever they live, wherever they work, wherever God has called them to be. And they work together for that purpose and for God's glory as well. And we just want you to be a part of one of those groups. Because the second thing we're doing is that we're focusing on the things that actually make us salty, that make the change. We're focusing more and more on loving one another and loving our neighbors. We're focusing more and more on aligning our hearts with God and caring about justice issues. We're focusing more and more on developing relationships by which change takes place in this world, by the way. You want to change somebody, it's not going to happen by if I just walk up into the mall and say, hey, I want to make you give you a better life. Let's meet once a week and we'll do that. It happens through relationship. And it happens through service. We want to focus on service and love and action in that way. Changing the world around us in a way that everybody has a place, that everybody has a role, just as we talked about in the skit earlier today. But the other thing we're doing is we're helping each other shine brighter through support of the koinonia groups, prayer. Just this week, I received a couple of people's prayer requests or questions about their own personal mission field. Pray for this. Pray for this person. This is God working. This is exciting. We partner with one another. Where my strengths are, you may have weaknesses. And where my weaknesses are, you have strengths. And that's how God intended it. And of course, we're trying to do better as a church to equip you to fulfill the purpose that God has for you. And so I'm going to close today, and this is what I want to think about. As we reflect on our identity, as we reflect on our purpose as a part of God's church and God's mission, there are two things that I want you to do. Two things I encourage you to do. First of all, embrace the reality of our identity. Verse 13, and throughout that passage, you are the salt of the earth. Not you can be, not you will be, not go be. It is you are. That if you're a follower of Christ, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. So simply embrace that part of your life's purpose is to change, to be an agent of change, and to shine the light to Jesus, to show people the way to Christ. But the second thing is this. Don't feel guilty. Start small and watch God work. I feel like definitely, whenever someone tells me that I'm doing something wrong or I'm not doing enough, it makes me feel guilty. I feel a little beat up. And the reality is that when we expose the things that we're not doing right according to God's will, it can be kind of exhausting. And what I want to tell you sincerely as your lead minister is that don't spend a lot of time feeling guilty about what you don't do. Now, if God is convicting you, if that's the Holy Spirit, and He's right up in your face right now, don't dismiss that on my account. If God is right there. But what I'm saying is I'm not telling you this to tell you I don't want you to feel guilty. I don't want to guilt you in to being salt and light. But I want you to start small. Every story that we hear today on these videos are somebody that started small. I love Carol's story that she started just one time a week, or one time giving a ride, which became then more and more. And all of a sudden now she's in the midst of these kids' lives, serving with them, not just as a driver, which is so important, but also teaching. Start small and then watch God work. Because God is not saying, I want you to go from no salt and light to an African missionary. He's saying, just find a way to serve me and watch God work. Just like our last video, Belinda, like she did. Watch this.
It's been a difficult ride for me the last several years, and it was always difficult for me to ask for help whenever I needed it. And I came into this church of loving arms, and they showed me so much love that now I know that I can ask for help whenever I need to, and that has grown into me wanting to reach out to other people and show them how God can change their life just by the way that they show love to others. And it can be small things. It doesn't have to be huge things. A small thing is a hug or a kind note, and I was really excited whenever I had the opportunity to become involved with the mission focus that we have now. I'm a single mother, and in the past when I've attended church, there's never been a niche for me to fit in. And that never seemed to matter here. And I was accepted, and I got involved with the mission that we have now with the neighborhood that we are working with. And it's just one more opportunity to show other people how the love of God can really change your life. And if I can do that to one person, I feel like I have really succeeded, even though I want to continue to do that in everything I do in my life. I probably don't always show that, but I am so encouraged. I am a better person now, having gone through some of the rocky road that I have traveled down. And I believe that God led me down that road specifically to bring me to this point in my life where I could be able to show that love and how great and wonderful and forgiving and all-encompassing it is just to feel that God wraps His arms around you and comforts you. I'm able now to be able to show that truly to other people, that God does love you. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter if you've got the big house or the little house or the big car or the small car or no car. It matters that you're you. And He created you, and He made you with special talents and abilities. And we can all grow into that. And being here and being a part of that mission has shown me that I can do that, and I know it can show other people the same thing.
See how you've gifted us, see our purpose as a church and as individuals, and help us to just be salt and light. Help us to not be mixed with impurities. Help us to not cover our light with a bowl. And let us just get engaged for your glory, knowing that you've called us to do that, and that we'll be fulfilled by doing that as well. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.